don't need them to build our cars. I'd rather see Detroit or South Carolina or any one of our Tennessee, any one of our states build the cars. They could do it very easily. We don't need them for anything. We don't need them for energy. We have more energy than they do. We don't need them for energy.
Well, that's not exactly true. Canada is the biggest exporter of critical minerals and metals to the U.S., necessary from defense to aerospace and car parts to smartphones. Critical minerals and metals are necessary for running everyday life. But the U.S. itself has only 1.3% of those elements. Nearly $47 million worth comes from this country, sourced from almost every province. China is next at just over 28 million U.S. But importing from that country poses serious security concerns. Joining us now is Chris Hernandez-Roy, who looked into this dependence for the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Chris, great to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
What is the U.S.'s situation right now in terms of access to critical minerals? How stable is that supply, and how much does the U.S. need these very specialized, hard-to-come-by minerals?
Yeah, well, critical minerals, first of all, is a fairly large group of metals, some of which are really rather exotic and rare, and you only need small amounts for the applications that are needed. Now, what's happened in the last 20 years is China, while it mines some of these critical minerals, it's actually become a refining hub for the world to the point where it exercises almost monopolistic control on some of these minerals. So given the trade tensions and geopolitical competition between the two countries, the U.S. and other allies like the European Union have sought to look for these minerals from more reliable and safe sources. And here's where Canada can play a really important role. Now, Canada already is the largest supplier of like a whole basket of all minerals, whether they're critical or not, to the United States. It's the #1 supplier in terms of a single country in the world. Canada supplies 90% of potash, 50% of aluminum, 30% of uranium, 25% of steel to the United States. It's a major supplier of copper, niobium, which is one of those more rare and specific minerals, nickel, and other things. And Canada also has some of the more, very rare stuff like germanium, gallium, tungsten, bismuth. Some of these the Chinese have actually put export controls on, and Canada has these in the ground. It's also a producer of some of these, like germanium, for instance, which is there's a refinery out in British Columbia, which is the largest refinery outside of China for these things. So Canada can really be, already is a major supplier to the United States, but can be an even greater supplier for some of these things the Chinese are putting export controls on.
You mentioned some key critical minerals there, like tungsten or germanium. What are those used to make?
Sure. So, I mean, all of these metals have both civilian applications and defense applications. Germanium, gallium, for instance, are used in chips, in semiconductors, which are really important for powering your computer, powering your smartphone. But they're also, these chips are also essential for your cars, and more importantly, from the defense perspective, from a whole range of applications in the military. Other things like rare earths are used to make magnets, which run electric motors. And those are essential for things as small as the little tiny electric motors that control the movement of your car seat, those little buttons where you can adjust the comfort of your car seat, all the way to motors in defense applications. They're used in radar arrays and a number of other things. So from consumer electronics, consumer goods, to a range of defense applications.
So when President Donald Trump says that he doesn't need anything from Canada, that maybe is not completely accurate?
That is not accurate at all, and that goes beyond just critical minerals. We can talk about oil, and other commodities that the U.S. desperately needs from Canada. But when it comes to critical minerals, right now, for instance, there is a shortage of the rare earth elements, which are the ones that are used to make these permanent magnets, which again are used in cars and also in defense applications. And the U.S. desperately needs those, and Canada is a supplier. It's a small supplier right now, but it's scaling up production of that.
And there was a situation recently where a Ford plant actually had to shut down in the U.S. temporarily as a result of a shortage of critical minerals. Can you tell us about what happened there?
Yeah, that's a story, and it's not just Ford. Toyota had the same problem, and some car makers in Europe are having the same problem. These are the rare earth elements that are used to make these permanent magnets, which are in a range of motors. Multiple motors are in a car from these tiny little things. They control your air conditioning system, the opening of the vents. They do a whole bunch of different things. And so there has been a shortage of those, and it has forced Ford, for instance, had to close a Chicago plant making the Ford Explorer in May for 1 week because it just didn't have enough supply of these things. So it's having already a direct impact. And there's talk about it having a greater impact in really important defense systems, such as like the production of the F-35 fighter jet.
The F-35 obviously is something Canada has under review right now, but had promised to purchase. Speaking of defense applications, I understand there was a large U.S. defense firm that recently signed an agreement with the province of Saskatchewan regarding access to critical minerals for those national security applications you're talking about. What can you tell us about that deal?
Yeah, so Saskatchewan has built a rare earth element refinery. This is by the Saskatchewan Research Council. They built it last year. It started production late last year, and it's ramping up production this year. About 2 weeks ago, it signed an agreement with a company called RE Alloys, I guess Realloys, which is a U.S. company that also refines certain critical minerals, and together with the Saskatchewan Research Council, Rare Earths hopes to produce, will produce these permanent magnets, and they're a supplier to the defense industry, just to the defense industry.
So when we hear in Canada, for example, on the 232 tariffs, or when we hear in Canada about the steel tariffs, Donald Trump uses national security as one of the reasons for that. But now we're hearing we have these critical minerals that are very important to U.S. national security and the national economic security of the U.S. too for a lot of industry. Can Canada use that, do you think, for leverage in the negotiations for a new trade agreement and to try to get some of these tariffs reduced or lifted?
I think absolutely. I mean, I've said for a while now that I think critical minerals is one of the things that will unlock what the Prime Minister has said is a new relationship with the United States. This is something that they need. This is something we can provide, and it should be a win-win on both sides of the border when it comes to critical minerals.
How strong do you think Canada's hand is on this to play with Donald Trump going forward?
I think it's a very strong hand. I think it's one of the strongest, the most important aspects in the toolkit that the Canadian government will deploy in its negotiations with the United States. There's no doubt that they need our critical minerals, and there's no doubt that they would prefer to get them from Canada than they would certainly from foreign entities of concern. They import a lot of uranium from Canada. They used to import a lot of uranium from Russia. I think they would continue to prefer to have it from us than from them. The same is true of other things like cobalt, which Canada is ramping up. The major producer of cobalt is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and there are major human rights violations in those mines. So you can get cobalt from Canada without that problematic aspect of human rights.
A pretty significant advantage for Canada in trying to move forward with this. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Mercedes.